Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Emily Schrader, Catherine Peretz-Chakdam, and Behnam Taleblu. Thank you very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we dive back into the conversation, let's take a listen to some international reactions. Lots of talk, but can they walk the walk? Let's take a listen and pick up the debate from there.
4 individuals engaged in the recent demonstrations have been executed over the past month following expedited trials that have not met minimum guarantees of fair trial and due process required by international human rights law. International human rights law is binding on Iran, and this makes the executions tantamount to an arbitrary deprivation of life.
The German government condemns, in the strongest possible terms, Iran's continued use of the death penalty as a means of oppression. The German government again urgently calls on the Iranian regime not to carry out any further death sentences and to immediately abolish the death penalty. Together with our international partners, we will continue to increase pressure on the Iranian regime and work towards the respect of human rights.
So let's get to it. Is the West simply too soft in its reaction? Another quick fire round, 30 seconds each, and we move on from there. Emily Schrader, please take the lead.
So I think the West has been pathetically weak when it comes to Iran for many, many years. The fact that the European Union is voting just next week, I believe, in a couple of days, to potentially list the IRGC as a terrorist organization is a really important step. It absolutely needs to happen, but these steps are long overdue. And the fact that the Biden administration was even considering nuclear negotiations is just outrageous. You know, there's a lot of talk about human rights and how Iran should abolish the death penalty, etc. These governments have had opportunities to make change and to force Iran's hand, and they haven't done it. And now people are dying as a result. It's unacceptable.
Yeah, one would think that a string of executions would pose as a red line. Apparently not the case. Catherine, your thoughts?
I completely agree with Emily. I think it's actually rather pathetic that, you know, all Western capitals are completely failing in addressing the threat that the Islamic Republic poses. But there's another aspect to this that we haven't considered yet, at least not enough, is the fact that the Islamic Republic is not only posing a threat to the West directly, but also to the West's strategic partners in the Middle Eastern region, and obviously Israel being, you know, one of them. And for me, there's a double failure there, not only to meet the requirements and the duty that we have of care towards human life and human, you know, the sanctity of life, and obviously protecting Iranians, but also protecting the interests of our partners that we have entered agreement with, and we're failing there. And there is a danger. We're setting a very dangerous precedent.
Behnam Taleblu.
Yeah, again, just kind of connecting the dots, because I broadly agree here. The West has really pulled its punches, because the one thing that's really oriented and animated its policy towards Iran for at least 2 decades, if not more now, has not been the plight of the Iranian people, has not been properly dealing with the terrorism issue, has not been dealing with arms proliferation, has not been dealing with the evolving long-range strike capabilities like ballistic missiles. It's been the nuclear issue. And so long as the nuclear issue continues to be issue number 1, no matter the rhetoric that it's not, so long as there is no snapback of that older UN Security Council resolutions bringing back a baseline for multilateral pressure against Iran, the West sanctions and the West rhetoric is going to be merely ornamental and not instrumental when it comes to standing with the Iranian people.
Okay, please feel free to interact from this point onwards. Maybe I'm trying to rationalize here, but perhaps the weak Western response or international pressure is due to the fear that the more aggressive the international community gets, the more destructive the regime gets domestically.
I don't know how much more destructive the regime can get. I mean, they've destabilized the entire Middle East as it is. They're slaughtering Muslims all throughout this entire region, and yet the Muslim world isn't united against them, although they are more than the West. And they've been carrying out terrorist operations in the West, even in South America and Argentina, for decades. And yet still, the international community hasn't acted to hold this regime accountable. We talk about the executions. Germany, the EU, the United States are all condemning the recent executions. Iran has led the world in executions more than any other country for, I don't know, a few decades. So this isn't a new phenomenon. This is something that's been ongoing for a long time. The European Union and the United States have known about it, and despite that, they've continued to treat the Iranian regime as if they are maybe a bad actor, but, you know, an international actor, the same as maybe other oppressive regimes. This regime is not the same as other oppressive regimes. Earlier, we spoke about how it's terrifyingly modern. That's exactly correct. This regime is extremely dangerous. They threaten global security for every region of the world, not just the Middle East. And for that reason precisely, they should not be treated as a regular bad actor. This is a different situation. Their level of barbarity is truly unmatched, and it's getting worse. And we've seen that happen in a continuous a pattern upwards of how barbaric they've become. And the international community should have acted a long time ago, and they need to act yesterday, now.
Catherine.
I agree, but I would say I think we're missing something here. I think that the West is, and the international community as a whole, is well aware of the danger that the Islamic Republic poses. However, we are under two misguided notions. Is that number one, we believe, and we have believed that for quite some time now, for quite a few decades actually, that Iran is actually reacting to whatever it is that the West is doing, and that therefore we have, through appeasement and containment and by doing nothing, that hopefully Iran would diffuse and actually move away from its belligerence. And we have failed in reading the signs of the regime and actually understanding that the Islamic Republic's ideology is geared toward exportation, and that therefore they will not stop, they cannot stop, and they don't want to, more importantly. Also, I do believe that, and that is especially true for Washington, is that Washington still believes that China is the bigger threat still, and therefore efforts are being exerted towards containing that threat, that perceived threat, as opposed to actually looking at the Islamic Republic and understanding by diffusing and allowing Iranians to change the regime, and then we would be able to address threats which are, in my mind at least, real, but not immediate, in the sense that the Islamic Republic is threatening us with a nuclear holocaust. So let's wake up and think about this for 2 seconds. We're talking weeks away. We're talking maybe months away. We need to react now, and preferably it would have been yesterday, would have been better. But here we are having a discussion, and hopefully the West will listen.
I think when it comes to China, that's actually an interesting comparison. I just want to add one thing really quickly, because China, for all of its oppression, actually does act somewhat rationally. They're a regime that is very calculated. However, the Islamic regime does not. And I think that's the core thing you're talking about when it comes to what the West is missing, that this regime isn't necessarily logical. They don't even necessarily do what's in their interest. They do what's in a fanatical ideology, and they operate as a mafia. There are people even within the regime who don't support the regime. And it's just amazing to me, the hypocrisy that we're seeing in the West, because at the same time that this regime, the IRGC forces and other security forces, are kidnapping children, are sexually assaulting and raping children in some instances, to the point where some of them are dying, and the West isn't outraged enough. We have endless coverage over people like Jeffrey Epstein, absolutely evil human beings who have done heinous crimes, and yet we're not the same level of outrage at what's happening now, that there are other teenagers who are in immediate danger from this regime. It's unacceptable.
Behnam.
Oh, it is indeed unacceptable. But again, there is a way to actually link the dots here, because whether it's China or whether it's the evolving Iranian threat to Europe, for instance, there is a great interest for the West to, connect the dots of the larger threat posed by the Islamic Republic. And in this instance, look, Iran is aiding and abetting right now Putin's imperial war against the Ukrainian people, and the specific targeting of civilian infrastructure and of civilians with drones. And it's doing it in a strategic and in a lethal way, such that it's forcing the West to spend more on air defenses, much like the Israelis for so long have had to spend more on air and missile defense to intercept and thwart an evolving array of Palestinian rockets provided to them or taught to them to be locally produced by the Iranians. So this is an evolving, exportable model for the terrorism strategy of the Islamic Republic. China is the largest illicit and licit importer of Iranian oil. If we have a problem with the national security behavior of the Islamic Republic, we all have to collectively get tough on China. If we don't want the problems of the Middle East to spill over into Europe, whether that's the refugee issue, whether that's the drug issue, whether that's the arms proliferation issue, it's time to tackle the threat at the core, which is dealing more appropriately with the government of the Islamic Republic. And in this instance, unlike in many instances differences around the world, our strategies and our values can actually be in concert and not in conflict with another. So when the Iranian people are bravely protesting against our adversaries, we shouldn't miss the chance to stand with them.
We're all interlaced, and we didn't even mention Charlie Hebdo making headlines this week. Again, let's hope the West will not wait for another Charlie Hebdo type of a wake-up call until it acts further. Katrina Perez Shekdam and Emily Schrader and Behnam Taleblu, thank you very much for this 2-minute break, and we're back with more.